Hello and welcome to another episode of Linux and Code. Today we are continuing our series on building a JSON API with Express, and today we are talking about authentication with passport.js for a local user strategy. Let's get started. So before we write any code, first we're going to need to install a few dependencies that we'll be using throughout this part of the project, and I'll try to cover what each of them does, but for right now we need to just get them installed. So we're going to do our npm install, and then we need to install passport local, passport local mongoose, Json Web Token, and cookie parser. Now, there are a ton of different ways to do authentication, and there are heavy discussions around all of them. We're going to focus on one specific approach here, and that's going to be using a server-signed JWT in an authorization cookie. And the reason for this is it provides access for clients that aren't using a session, because you can use the authorization header. Not to mention, because we're going to be making our cookie HTTP only and with a secure flag, it will mean that non-authorized clients can't intercept the cookie, and rogue JavaScript also can't intercept the cookie and hijack it. So we're going to be getting into what all of that means in just a second, but I just wanted to say up front what way we were going to use to build this. Okay, so back into this. And there's also one additional package we need, and that's bcrypt. And we're going to use the JavaScript version because there can be issues with the normal version in terms of binaries depending on the system that you're using. So even though we're in Docker here, we're just going to use the native JavaScript version because it'll play nice with all of our modules. Okay, now we can get started in our main server.js file. There are a couple of things that we will need to include in here before we can even get into any of the other configuration. So first we're going to need cookie parser. I like to group this by body parser as it's pretty similar. And then we need to also tell our application to use it. And we do that just like we did for body parser. We're just going to come down here right above our body parser, and we're going to do an app.use, and it's going to be cookie parser. And unlike body parser, we don't need to call .json or anything. We just need to initialize its function call so that it's set up. Now we'll have access to cookies that are passed in to our requests. And next we're going to actually need to include passport here in the root of our file. And what this is going to do is allow the rest of our application to access the passport middleware. And so we need to include that and get that set up. So per usual, just require it. And then we're actually going to include this down below body parser, but above Morgan. And this actually has a specific method on it that we're going to call, and it's called initialize. No special functions or anything that we need to call off of that or option parameters, just passport.initialize and save. Now for right now, that's all we need to do in this file. We may have to come back here to set up some other configuration, but for right now we're okay. Okay, now the next thing that we're going to change is our user model itself. So we're going to come over to our models, user, and in here we're going to need to do something that we've never done before in this project, and that's use a plugin for our user model. So we actually don't need to make a separate require. You can make a separate require if you want, but I'm going to do it all in one line. So down below where we've defined our model, we're going to make a new line, and it's going to be user.plugin. So this is a function off of the mongoose schema that we've created, and then we're going to reference our plugin, which in this case, we're requiring something here, and it's going to be that passport local mongoose that we installed with npm earlier. Now we're doing this because this handles a lot of work in the background for us. It will add a password field and a hash to our user model for us. You can customize these things with the inclusion of the middleware if you want to. I'm not going to. I'm going to leave it at the default, but just for reference, we'll bring this up. We'll search for npm passport local mongoose. That's this very first result. And as you can see, you just have to require it on whatever model you're using. You don't even have to have a username field defined. We already do, so that's okay. And there's extra configuration and things down here that you can look through, but it gives us access to a couple of key things. Mainly, it lets us use promises on the authentication method, which passport.js does not by default. So it's a huge convenience feature for us. It also means we shouldn't have to write any crypto ourselves, which is important because we're probably worse at it than the people who maintain this library are. Again, as always, check the library for issues, see if there's any reported problems with it. But in general, with authentication, it is better to build using an established library and something that has been checked by others instead of rolling it yourself. Okay, let's get back to our code. So what we're going to tackle next is creating our routes for registering and logging in users. And because we're going to allow more than one authentication method, local along with some other strategies, we're going to have to make a little bit of a better route structure than you might if you were only doing one strategy. So first we're going to make a new folder inside of our routes, and we're going to call it auth. And this is where we're going to store all of our strategies that we're going to use. And next, as usual, we're going to make an index file. Now, as we usually do with all of our other things, we're going to need to include that in here. So we're going to go ahead and say router.use/auth and require ./auth. And we're going to go ahead and grab this function declaration while we're here. And so we can copy paste this in here and then clean this up because we won't need the item or the user in here. And now inside of this index, we're going to do something similar. We're going to make a local folder and index for this as well. So we're going to say /local, and then we're going to reference.local, which doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and make that folder. And now we're set. Go ahead and copy this, make a new index. Now you could do all of this in one authentication index file if you want. You don't have to do as many levels as I'm doing. I do it because I think it helps me keep organized, but you definitely don't have to if you don't want to. So I'm gonna go back. It looks like I didn't save that file, so we're gonna go back and save it. And now we're going to define all the different methods that we're going to eventually need to reference. So we need a login, we need a register or sign up, whatever you want to call it. We need a logout, and we may need some kind of authorizer depending on what application we're targeting here. So let's go ahead and make the stubs for all of those. So we're going to call it sign up in our case because that's generally easier to reference than register. And we'll copy this line. And next we're going to make login. And then we're going to make logout. And last but not least, we're going to make a authorizer, which we may come back to that later. And we'll just call it /me, but I'm gonna comment that one out for now because it'll probably be in a later episode. So we're gonna make a new file for all of these. So signup.js, login.js, and logout.js. So let's go make sure we made all that we needed to. We did. We can go ahead and save that. We will need, again, this same function for all of these, but not these methods. Okay, so first and foremost, we're going to need to do sign up because login and logout will not work without registered users. So we're going to do sign up first. And there are a lot of different ways to sign users up. We're just going to be covering one method here, and that's going to be the local strategy using passport. So let's get into that. Okay, so first we're going to require the packages that we need, which is actually quite a few. So we're going to need passport itself. We will need our user model. And we have to climb a couple of directories to get to this, unfortunately. But then it's in our models and our user. But we also need a few more packages besides. We need our JWT library. And we need one other package that I forgot to install. So we'll install that now, and that's just called cookie. And that lets us create cookies. So cookie parser let us parse cookies off the request. The cookie package lets us create them. So we've done our JWT, let's get cookie. And then last but not least, we need one more package called local strategy. And this is actually coming from passport local, and it's a method on it just called strategy. So now that we have that, we can get into creating our actual routes for this. So per usual, we need a router, but this is going to be a post because this should not be accessible on a get or a put. And here you can think of this still as just being /API/auth/local/sign up. So we're already at this endpoint. We don't really need to add anything else here. We're going to need our usual suspects and our request, response, and next object. And then close that all off. So we have our route signature set up, and now we need our actual user registration, which is pretty straightforward. We're going to user.register, which is a new one, and we're going to say new user. So we're creating a new instance of our user model, which we required right here. And now we need to say what we're including in that model by default. So we get this object constructor here. So depending on what you expect people to pass in, you'll need to initialize different things here. So if we take a look at our user model, we have username, we have preferences, that's optional, timestamps. We don't really want them creating anything here. We're going to go ahead and make an ID for them. So this is going to be a new UUID, which if you remember from our other user creation, we'll go ahead and grab both UUID and validator because we should do that at the same time actually. So, but we can just call UUID. And actually, while we're at it, let's grab this. Because since we are doing a new user creation, we should still follow the same validation schemes that we did before. I'm actually going to do this for two properties. I'm also going to do it for password. Okay, so now we can pass in the methods or the properties that we expect to be here. In our case, username. Again, ES6 syntax, you can reference exactly what you expect it to be if it's the same name. And password. Now, password I'm going to be doing a little bit differently just because there's some hidden intricacies inside of passport local mongoose that sets up this field in the background for us, so we don't really want to touch that. And then we're going to call a chain method on this. So we've made this new user, we get that user back, and we're going to now authenticate them. We've made this new user, let's go ahead and authenticate them. So this we can actually move to the top. Right here below our user, we're going to call authenticate, and it is going to be off of our user object. And it's just a method. So now that we have that, we can say return authenticate and username and password. And what this is doing is it's checking against the new user that we just created with the credentials that were provided in the request. And now we'll have an authenticated user object, which is different from our normal user model. And then once again, we're going to get a authenticated user back. You can name that whatever you like. And from here, we can do some interesting things. There is a slim chance that this authentication can fail if there was like a duplicate username or a username and a different password that were passed in. There are a couple of situations that this could fail. So if the auth user, we'll get to why that is in a second. If that doesn't exist, then we have no user and we need to reject this request. And 403 is an unauthorized or login restricted message. And we'll just say invalid username or password. Now, since this is in our signup, we may want to use a different message there in the future, but for right now, we're going to go with it. Now, this is where things get interesting because now we're assuming we have this user and we're assuming they are authenticated. So now we need to give something back to the client talking about what that is. So to get started on this, we're going to first create our Json Web Token that we'll then add to our cookie. So we're going to make a new constant and we're going to call it signed JWT, and we're going to set it equal to a new promise because the JWT library by default, unfortunately, is either synchronous or requires a callback, and we want everything to be capable of returning a promise, so we have to make our own. So resolve and reject are the parameters we're creating here. We're going to make a new arrow function. Then we need to call JWT.sign, and this accepts a ton of different methods for creating this, but first we need to make our payload, and then we're going to pass in some options later. So our payload in this case is going to be a derivative of our user object itself. So we have our user model that has these properties in it, and the key thing is here, we don't want to give back all of the data in our user model to this key because they can actually be relatively easily decrypted client side. We're going to try to prevent that by having a complex token, but we don't want to take any chances, right? So we're only going to include our user._ID, and so we'll just call this ID, and we're going to include the username itself, which should be user.username. And with this being the only part in the payload that does two things for you, if your user object for whatever reason increases, say a user has preferences, your JWT and cookie won't balloon with more data being added to the user. It'll always just include the ID and the username. You don't have to worry about dangerous information like the password itself being included in the JWT. And the combination of the ID and the username should be more than enough to guarantee that this token knows who it belongs to. And you can use that for things that we will later, like middleware. So now we need to provide some kind of secret for this authentication. So we're going to call it our token secret, and we don't have this in existence yet. So we're going to come up to the top, and I actually lied. We don't need this local strategy, so we'll get rid of that. But we do need this token secret. So we're going to call const token secret, and we're going to make it equal to process.environment.token secret. And this way in production, the token secret can be not known by anyone. And that's a good thing because you can dynamically generate it per instance, and you can rotate it out if you need to very easily. In our case, we're not going to set it when we start up the application. So we need an alternative if it's not set, and we're just going to set this to please set a real secret in production. And this would be capable of decoding our JWT, given that value. So we are now passing our token secret, and we also need to give an expiration to our token itself. And that is another options parameter. You could pass in it as a property in this jwt.sign, but we're going to do it here because it lets us access a little bit more of a convenient way. So that is pretty simple. We just need the expires in property, and then this lets us use a pretty cool syntax, and we're going to say 48 hours by default is how long our token will last before expiring. Now the other thing we need to pass in here is a callback, because we don't want it to be synchronous. So it's going to take in two things, an error and a response or result when it finishes. So again, because we want this to be promise chainable, we're passing this in here. So if we have an error, we're going to reject with that error, and else we want to resolve with the result. Go ahead and return both of these things. So now that we have that done, and we return something either way, we can now get on with doing what we need to. But now we need to make our cookie, and to do that, we actually need another expiration date. So I'm going to make another variable, and we're going to call it expires date, and it's going to just be equal to a new date. Now you could probably do this all in one line. I like doing this in two so that it's a little bit easier to figure out what's happening. We're actually going to make a new date off of our existing expires date, and this lets us set things a little bit easier. Set hours, and we're referencing again our existing get hours. And then, so once we have our existing hours, we want to add the amount forward that we want this to last, and in our case that's 48 hours. So it's really easy, we just do plus 48, and that's all we need to do. Now we're going to make a constant, and that's going to be cookie options, and it's just an object. HTTP only is going to be true because we don't want this to be accessible by any scripts. And then secure is going to be a little bit different. This means it can only be accessed over HTTPS. In our local environment, we don't have access to HTTPS, so we're going to do something here again, process.environment. And if it's in production, so node environment, if it's in production, we want this to be true. If it's not, we're going to set it to false so we can use it in our testing environment. And then, of course, the expires property of this is our expires date. Pretty straightforward. A lot, but pretty straightforward. So then we're going to call our response dot cookie, and then we're going to call this authorization. And then we're going to pass our token, which in our case, we've just called our signed JWT. And then we're going to pass our cookie options, which signs the whole thing. A lot, I know. And if you remember, we haven't actually saved this user yet, which is crazy. So we actually need to do a then statement off of this signed JWT. So that's fine. And we'll just call this user JWT, and we'll move this code inside of there. So once we have this, we're going to return our saved user. So in our case, we have to kind of look a little bit to see how we have access to that. And we call it our auth user. So we're going to return our auth user dot user. We're not done. Dot save. Kind of a mess, I know. So now we're up 2 whole levels. We can then call another dot then. And I may have gone too far actually. Yeah, should be right there. we're where we should be. So then we have a saved user. And now we can do something meaningful with it. Again, we already have our cookie set, we have our user saved, now we just need to give it back. So let's call return res.status. This is a 201, we have successfully created a user, JSON, and now we get to limit what we return. So I'm going to give back a couple of things. I'm going to give the user object itself, which I'm going to cherry pick properties that I want to return because I don't want someone to have access to this password in plain text. I'm going to give the ID, which should be our saved user, ._ID. I am going to give the username itself, which should be our saved user, .username. And that's it. And then besides this user object, I'm going to give an isAuthenticated property. And it's going to be set to true. And we're going to save this whole thing after we write a catch block for this whole thing. And we'll return a 500 error. And we'll just say error creating user. And for our sake right now, we'll console.log this. Because there's a good chance we'll hit this. And let's try it out. So let's start up our Docker container. We already have an error. User.authenticate is not a function. Okay, so there's actually a lot of issues in this file, and we're gonna go through them one by one. When I was looking over this authenticate error, I noticed a lot of things. So first we need to change this to be lowercase, and then that is a function we can use. So that's, once again, my mistake. Second, this is not how the register route works. This key is not valid. Password for the register is passed in as another argument to the register function. So that we need to fix. Then we're looking okay, except right here we try to reference user directly when it's actually under this auth user that we've been given. So we're going to reference auth user.user. And if you want to make this a little bit more clear, you could change this to result. So it's result.user. If you want to, that would be perfectly fine. So that's okay. Next, we actually need to return this signed JWT new promise that we're creating so that we can access it later. This is okay. Our JWT is okay. However, what is not okay is there needs to be this catch block here. We don't have that before, so I've added that in. And you can get away without having that, but it'll throw a warning that you aren't catching a potential error. And last but not least, this try catch block that we added is actually one level too deep. It's currently being chained off of the return, and it needs to be off of the then. So we'll move that down one level and hit save. Now that we've done all of that, we still have an error, and it's saying user is not defined, and I may have moved this above my user declaration. I did. So now if we save that one more time, now we should be okay. Let's go over to our request, and it's pretty similar to our existing create on a user. So we're going to copy this and paste it in as a new one. This API route is a little bit different though, right? It's /API/auth/local/signup. This is still content type JSON, that's fine. Let's give this Jimmy Bob as a user, and for a password, let's just set it to ABCDE. And let's send that request. And it works. Okay, so now that we know that we have code that works, we're going to essentially try to do the same thing for login much quicker. So we're going to copy our entire signup file. We're going to hop over to our login, replace everything in it with what we just copied from that. But we are going to do a couple of things differently. For one thing, we're not going to be registering a new user. So we're going to cut out this first part of our promise chain. We're going to just call this authenticate username and password. That should be all we need to do. We still need to return this same JWT because someone's logging in, and we're still returning our saved user. So let's go over to our request and try it. We're going to copy our sign up, and we're just going to change this to login. And we get back a successful response, which is exactly what we want. What if we use a bad password? This is going to throw an error. So if we send this request, we get an invalid username or password, which is what we would expect, but our API is complaining on our server, and that's because we've actually done something incorrectly. Over here on login, we have to do this a little bit differently for this status because we aren't within the confines of user.register to catch problems, so we need to actually throw an error here. And that'll actually fix this. So now if we go try that same thing again, send the request, we still get an error creating a user, which we should also change to instead be something like invalid username or password. But as you could see here, we were getting the invalid username or password and it was getting thrown to our catch. So that's what we want, and we won't bother testing that again. So while this is working now on login and sign up, we actually are doing one thing incorrectly yet again. We get this user JWT back, but we're not actually setting it correctly in the cookie authorization. So we are actually passing a promise function to this res cookie, and that's not what we want. We want this user JWT. So we'll paste that in here and save. We'll go back over to sign up and also do the same thing here. So now if we test our login function, we get this authorization cookie back, which is what we want. So that works how we want. Now we need to do a logout. Now I handle logout with JWTs a little bit different because the problem with JWT is that they're stateless. They're not stored anywhere. That's what differentiates them from a session. So if you want them to work correctly though, you need some kind of a store in order to recognize ones that are no longer invalid. The expiration date works somewhat for this, but we need one more step for our logout. And we'll also need to compare it against this in our login method. But our logout method is going to need a new model actually. And this is going to be a blacklist. So we're going to make a new file. And I'm just going to call it blacklist. I'm just going to copy my user model here and paste it in, although this is only going to have one thing. And that is going to be token, which is going to be a string. We'll leave the timestamps on, that doesn't really hurt. We'll get rid of the user. We'll call this a blacklist. We don't need this UUID either. And we do actually need one additional property on here, and that's going to be user ID, which we'll also just set to a string. Save it. So how do we use this? Well, over in our logout method, it's going to be actually pretty straightforward. And so per usual here, we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to need our user model. We're going to need our blacklist model. And we're going to need our JWT. And we will also need our cookie library. Now we need access to our router. and we just need to make a route on it per usual. So this is going to be a post, just a logout. We already aliased that in the index. So in this route signature, we need to check if the header is present. So depending on how you're getting this request, your headers may look a little bit differently. So we're going to add in a check for both. So if we don't have req.headers.cookies and we don't have req.headers.cookie, then we're just going to return res.status401.json, and we're going to say user actually unauthorized. Now that's just a small little check to make sure we have one of these two headers to authenticate against. So provided we have that, now we need to parse that cookie. So we're going to say, okay, let's do our const user JWT is going to equal cookie.parse, and we're going to check these same things again. So req.headers.cookies, that's not present. req.headers.cookie.authorization. And this is the name that we set earlier in our login and sign up. So that's what we want to look for. And once we do that, we need to now go ahead and verify this JWT. And to verify that JWT, we need our token secret. So let's go over to sign up, and we'll go ahead and grab this token secret right at the top, and we'll paste this in here. So we have our token secret back. Now we can verify it, right? So we'll call our decoded JWT equal to JWT.verify. Now what does this take? It takes our token, so that's our user JWT. It takes our secret, which is our token secret. It takes options, which we're actually not passing any currently. And it takes a callback. And in this case, we still want to do a promise, so we need to wrap this in a new promise that has a resolve and reject so this callback is going to have either an error or a decoded token, and if it's an error, we want to reject with that error. Else, we want to resolve with the decoded value, which is pretty great. That's exactly what we were doing before. So the problem is now we're doing another promise chain, so we actually need to call a .then on this. And now we are going to say, okay, we have our decoded JWT, which is going to just be a plain token. Now that we have our token, we can have access to our user ID and our JWT token itself. So with all of that, we can add it to our blacklist. So to do this, we're gonna have to reference a couple of things, but first we're going to look in our blacklist and we're going to call find, and the condition is going to be on where user ID is equal to our plain token .id. And we're also going to look again, let's take a quick glance at our model, at the token. And we have this token, which is actually the same as our user JWT. So we'll look for those. Then we have our results, which should be empty. So, but let's double check that. If results.length is greater than 0, we've already blacklisted this token. So we can just return res.status 401.json, and we can give a message back saying token already blacklisted. Shouldn't have ever happened, but in case it does, we want to catch it. Now, since we know that we don't have it, we want to make a new one. So we're going to return our blacklist.create, and the user ID is going to be equal to our plain token.id, and the token is going to be equal to our user JWT, because what a user would be passing in is the decoded or is the encoded version of the JWT, so that's what we need to blacklist. And so we're returning that. We can get up here out of this promise chain and call another then. And now that we have created this new token blacklist, we can do some other stuff. So we have our blacklisted token. We shouldn't even really need to use it. So we'll just call res.clear cookie authorization. And this tells the client to clear it. You can't guarantee it that they will, which is why we're creating this on a blacklist, but we're doing it anyway. And we're going to return res.status 205.json, and it's going to be empty. You could also do 204 for no content. I'm just using 205. And we'll call a catch statement on this. If we have an error, we'll just say return res.json. And we'll give this a 400 as a bad request because they may not have passed in something correctly. So .json message bad request. And for our sake, we'll log this error. And we'll print that out. And that should be all we need. Let's save it. Now, in order to test this, we need to do things that we haven't done before yet again. So we need to call our login and get our authorization. We're going to copy this authorization header so we can use it here in a second. We're gonna make another new request. And instead of calling login, we're gonna call logout. And now with this header copied, let's put it in here. We actually don't need this username and password because that should all be read from the token. So we send this request and see what happens. But we need to tweak this a little bit because of how this works. So let's clear out all of this other data. And we need to make this equal to a colon. And now we try to send it and see what happens. We're spinning. Now, since this is spinning, I think there's actually something wrong. Let's go take a look. Okay, yeah, we're actually missing a bracket in the correct place. So we need to finish off this promise right here, which probably means we're off by one down here as well. Yeah, we are. And then this should all be indented one. Save that, and now we'll try logging out. And that works how we would expect. Perfect. So log in, log out, and sign up all work. What can we actually do with that? So the easiest way to use this will be to set something like a user on a request. So let's clear out of this request and let's go back up to, say, our primary index file. So it would be nice if items could only be set by an existing user. And that would look something like this. So you'd still use this, but now we'd reference this middleware function and we'd say authorizer. Now what's that? That doesn't exist yet. So this should be pretty cool. So we're going to actually make a new file in here. I'm sorry, a new folder called middleware. And we actually had this at the top of the project directory before, but we don't want it up there, so we're going to go ahead and remove that one. So in here, in this middleware, where we have our authorizer, this is going to look very similar to our login method, just a little bit different. So we're going to actually copy that file. And it's going to look kind of like a login and logout hybrid. So in our logout, we are going to need this blacklist. So under our authorizer, we'll go ahead and include that. So now this isn't actually any particular method, right? It's just a general use case. So we actually don't have a specific route. This applies to anything. It's not looking for a username and password, so we're not doing authenticate. What it is looking for is a header cookie. So this is going to be like logout. If this isn't here, instead of rejecting this out of hand with a 401, we could pass along a next and send it out, but we need to do something a little bit more. We're going to actually say our user is unauthorized, but also we need to set a flag that is authenticated is false. And other APIs can use that if they want. So we've set that just automatically. If they don't have these cookies, get out of here. Now, again, it's going to look a lot like logout. I probably copied the wrong file. So we're going to copy our JWT function and actually pretty much all of this, and head over here, and we're going to replace this login. We didn't really want that. Okay. So we verify our JWT, but instead of looking for a blacklist, we're now going to look for a user after we look through the blacklist. So if something is found in this blacklist, we still want to return this 401 because that's the whole point of having a token blacklist. So, but instead of creating it, now we're going to do another query. We're going to do a user dot find where the underscore ID is equal to this plain token ID. And we've already established at this point that our ID and token is valid through the other methods above. It's not blacklisted, so that it can still be a valid login. So now we get our user back. So instead of getting this blacklisted token here, now we're getting a user that's already logged in. So we're just going to say user. And instead of clearing a cookie, we're actually going to set something else. We're going to set the request to have a user object. And that's actually pretty straightforward to do. We're just going to say req instead of res, and we're going to say .user is now equal to the user that we're getting back from that. And we should also change this to find one. We don't want to look for more than one user. And again, instead of doing this 205 like we did for logout, we're going to do something completely different and call next. And what this will do is whatever function comes next in our request chain, which in our case will be this item route, will have this req.user set on it. And if any point of this fails, items, in our case, will no longer process. And we aren't looking at a blacklist anymore, so we'll just say error checking token and return a bad request. That's fine. And we should be set. Let's go ahead and save this. We need to adjust this. I think I have it one too many levels that it's looking for the blacklist in. But it actually should be okay. We'll just retype this. Save it. Also adjust this. Now we should be okay. So, provided we have a simple GET request on items, should actually fail now because it should be blocked. So we get unauthorized is authenticated false. So let's go log in. Okay, we get our authorization token. Let's copy that. And let's look and see. Yep, this is our item. So we now need to pass a authorization. How did we do that before? Just pass authorization and the value of our cookie and send the request. And now we get items back and our filter and everything else is still applying. So that is the basics of what we can do with this. We'll be adding to this more. We'll also cover Twitter, Google, and Facebook authentication strategies along with filtering like item results by the user that you're passing in by default. I hope you have enjoyed. This has been a long one. Thanks for sticking with it. Leave a comment below if there's something you think I should have covered or something I should have done differently. Have a great day. Take care.